Thank you, Plum, for sharing your story and for the work that you and colleagues are doing to advance this issue. I think the point you made around safe air lifting everybody, but in particular protecting those who are more at risk is really key. I'd like to now introduce and also acknowledge Dr. Amanda Cohen's advocacy and leadership in the New South Wales Parliament on this issue and in public health broadly. Dr. Amanda Cohen is a member of the New South Wales Parliament's Upper House and the Greens spokesperson for health in New South Wales. In Parliament, she's currently the chair of the Legislative Council's Health Committee. Before entering Parliament, Dr. Cohen was a GP practicing in Albury-Wodonga. She holds a Masters of Public Health in Epidemiology and a Masters of International Public Health. She has worked in community health, Aboriginal medical services, emergency departments across inland and regional New South Wales. She's committed to improving health outcomes by addressing the social and environmental determinants of health, including air quality. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I too would like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people as traditional owners of the land that we're on today, and also acknowledge that First Nations people understood for tens of thousands of years that the environment around us has a significant impact on our own well-being. And I think long before any academic talked about social and environmental determinants of health, this is something that's deeply embedded in First Nations culture and knowledge, and we should be building on that in the work we're striving to do today. I'm very excited to be in Canberra at Federal Parliament, away from the New South Wales Parliament for a day, partly because it's such a beautiful day in Canberra, but because this is a complex multidisciplinary problem that actually needs action and solutions from all three levels of government. And it's so exciting that there is a Parliamentary Friends of Clean Air here at Federal Parliament in Canberra and that we now have a federal CDC. But when you look at buildings like schools, hospitals, there's obviously such an important role for state governments to play in this work, and there's also an important role for local governments who run community centres, local libraries, sport and recreation facilities, and who set planning standards in their local communities. So I thank Plum for involving representatives of different levels of government today. I think it's really important. And I also wanted to acknowledge how important the Safer Air Project and Plum's work is for putting lived experience at the front and centre of the work that we're doing. There have been experts, academics, practitioners, engineers talking about and doing good work on this issue for many years now. But if I thought that a very good systematic review or a very good expert report would result in political change, I never would have run for state parliament. The key to getting the attention of the public, the community, policymakers and decision makers is to centre the people who are impacted by inaccessible clean air, like Plum and her family and like many of the people represented here today. This is how the change happens. We need the broader community to understand who is impacted by this and how we can help them. So before I was elected to state parliament 2.5 years ago, I was practicing as a GP in Albury-Wodonga on the front line of the pandemic, in a community that had the border closed through the middle of town on 6 different occasions. And watching as a practitioner this understanding emerge of the fact that COVID was clearly airborne and the health system really being sort of one step behind the 8 ball and playing catch up, I really would have thought, if you'd asked me 5 years ago about the state of this work, I would have thought this would be a key priority of governments now. And it's not just about pathogens. The other key issue that happened while I was practicing as a GP was the 2019-20 bushfires. And of course, my community of Albury-Wodonga in Sydney were blanketed in toxic smoke, PM 2.5 particulate pollution for weeks and weeks and weeks. My own house, which is clearly very leaky, was full of bushfire smoke. And of course, that has a huge impact on our health. And now, 6 years later, after those bushfires, we're seeing the wrong lessons learned out of those major events impacting the community. And when I talk to my now political and parliamentary colleagues, the lessons they seem to have learned out of the pandemic and out of the bushfires was that people's tolerance for being told what to do has gone down, that people lost a lot of political capital on restrictive public health measures like lockdowns. And it's resulted in this real inertia or this fear of taking meaningful action on these issues. So not only are those the wrong lessons, we're actually missing the opportunity to make the change that we need to make. And systemic solutions like actually setting standards for indoor air quality aren't opposed to that lesson that politicians have learned, because we shouldn't be asking individuals to go to those extra lengths to protect themselves. And Plum's already spoken so beautifully to that this morning. If we want to stop public health measures like lockdowns in future, we actually need to stop transmission of airborne pathogens within workplaces, schools, hospitals, and everywhere else. So that inertia should be a reason for us to look at systemic solutions now. I think this is obviously a multidisciplinary issue, and that's one of the things that make it very interesting and exciting to me as a bit of an epidemiology nerd. I love that this involves health workers, public health practitioners, engineers, building regulators, families, teachers, health workers. But the things that make it so interesting are also the things that make this really politically hard. And I've spent the last 2 years in New South Wales Parliament asking every minister we've got what they're doing about clean air. And what you get is the Environment Minister saying it's the Health Minister's problem, and the Health Minister says that it's the Minister for Better Regulation and Fair Trading problem, who says that it's the Environment Minister's problem. And then they say, well, maybe you should talk to the federal government, and the federal government says the states run the hospitals. And you just keep going around and around. So what we really need to do is cut through that level of inertia and put that lived experience at the centre. So what's happening in New South Wales? Why am I up here today when it's actually Victoria who's been leading the way on safer air from a state perspective? So as chair of the New South Wales Upper House Health Committee, I'm very proud to announce today that we are conducting a parliamentary inquiry into clean indoor air. In New South Wales Parliament, like federal Parliament, we have fantastic indoor air. We're in a 200-year-old heritage building where one of my parliamentary colleagues in the previous term of Parliament actually got sick from the mould in the chamber. And as part of the subsequent refurbishment of the building, we got absolute best practice HVAC in the building, and we are now privileged to have some of the best air quality in the state and in the country. It's really our responsibility to extend that air quality to the constituents that we represent across the state. The terms of reference for the inquiry are very broad, and deliberately so. We'll be looking at all pollutants and pathogens, considering the implications of indoor air quality for health, for productivity in the economy, for work health and safety, for accessibility and inclusion, for climate resilience, and for pandemic preparedness. And I do want to acknowledge my parliamentary colleagues that even though I'm the chair of that committee, I can't establish an inquiry like this on my own. And so having support from backbench members of the upper house across the political spectrum, including members of the government, has allowed this inquiry to go ahead, and I'm very grateful for their support. So we need to hear from you, from all of you in this room, by the 12th of December, although I have heard that the chair will be very sympathetic to requests for extensions until probably the end of January, because we won't be reading your submissions until then anyway. But in closing, I just wanted to reflect on how exciting it is to be here with you all today, because I feel like the people in this room and watching online, together we're really at the forefront of what I hope will be the biggest public health reform of our generation. And I really look forward to spending the day with you all.